Hi, and welcome back to the DPAF. And I wanted to highlight the Conservative Party conference that occurred last week in Manchester. And, I've got far too much self-respect to watch an event like this. I did follow a few headlines. I noticed that Boris Johnson said one thing that I did agree with, which was that he is not responsible for fixing all the supply shortages. And I do agree with that because I do think it's wrong that the government get involved in the free market. But of course, if Boris Johnson is not responsible for fixing the shortages, then he should also not be responsible for causing the shortages, which is exactly what he's done. I mean, all these shortages we have in Britain now with fuel and food, which are going to get significantly worse and more widespread, are a total consequence of the lockdown, which was called for and implemented by Boris Johnson, by the Conservative government. I mean, what they're doing now is they're holding a Don't Blame Us conference because they don't want to be held responsible for causing the lockdown, causing the problems. But of course, the lockdown is the cause of the problems. It's the cause of unemployment. It's the cause of runaway debt. It's the cause of inflation. It's the cause of all these shortages. So I wanted to name this video and this conference the Don't Blame Us conference. I mean, there was going to be no one speaking at this conference talking about all the lives saved from the lockdown, how great the lockdown was, how Peter Daszak, the British guy, was responsible for the lab where the virus emanated from. No one was going to be talking about that. We're going to try and be talking about anything but. And you notice in the news these days, there's all this talk about inflation or, quote unquote, rising prices or shortages, and yet it's never connected to the lockdown. It might be connected to Russia, it might be connected to Brexit, it might be connected to some shipping container that crashed or got stuck, but it's never, ever, ever, ever connected to exactly the cause, which is the lockdown. Now, I understand Britain had a lot of economic problems before the lockdown. I've spent a lot of time talking about that. But does anyone listening to this podcast think that if there was no lockdown, that there would be shortages now? I highly doubt it. And, I think it's highly disingenuous that the Conservative Party don't own up to this. But of course, what do you expect from this bunch of criminals? I mean, they're a bunch of total and complete phonies. And of course, this is highlighted by the fact they call themselves the Conservatives when they're not remotely conservative. I mean, I'm a conservative, I'm happy to admit that, which is why I didn't go to the conference, because I wouldn't be allowed in. They wouldn't allow someone like me to speak because I'm conservative and they're not. They don't want someone who is conservative speaking because it undermines the message of the whole event, which is to pretend they're conservative, to deceive voters that they're conservative, but of course they're not conservative. So this was the Don't Blame Us party conference, and it was as phony as you could possibly imagine. What I've also been noticing in the news is some of these football managers trying to play the part of the government calling for vaccine coercion. And Gareth Southgate's come out and said, vaccines or taking the vaccine is for the good of society, when of course it's not for the good of society. What's for the good of society is individual choice. Now, individuals may choose to take the vaccine or they may choose not to take the vaccine. But of course, it's about individual choice. And, Gareth Southgate and others may or may not know, this was why we fought the Second World War. This was because the German government at the time did not promote individual choice, did not stand for individual choice, but we as Great Britain did. And this was why we sacrificed all these lives. This is why we remember every November, Remembrance Sunday, all the people that gave up their lives for freedom, for individual choice. And this is the way we want to live our lives in Great Britain. So Gareth Southgate and others may not stand for individual choice, but I certainly do. And, if you want to take the vaccine or you don't want to take the vaccine, if you want to lock yourself down or you don't want to lock yourself down, it's totally up to you. You need to follow the English Bill of Rights. That's the law. And the British government has been in violation of the law, as I said first, and as I have said repeatedly ever since. Also, Jurgen Klopp, The Liverpool manager, who is German, he's also been pushing the vaccine coercion. He was saying it's the same as drink driving. And I want to point out it's the exact opposite of drink driving, because drink driving is something you must not do. But according to Jurgen Klopp, the vaccine is something you must do. So in my very humble expertise, must and must not are opposites of each other. And of course, the key is that, the government is welcome to make laws preventing behaviour, but it cannot make laws to compel behaviour. And so what they do is they hide behind Jurgen Klopp, who's a private citizen, who's representing corporate interests, or maybe he's just representing himself, but he certainly works for a corporation. And he says you have to have the vaccine because the government cannot coerce behaviour. So they encourage or incentivize or entice well-known figures, famous people to speak on their behalf, to push vaccine coercion. And again, it's all about individual choice. Jurgen Klopp, being German, he may not understand that as well as British people. But again, this is why we fought the Second World War against Germany. We want to stand up for individual freedom, for individual liberty. And, there's a lot of these football people getting involved, both in vaccine coercion and also in social media censorship. And I think it's pretty disappointing. There's been a lot of rumours about how a lot of these Premier League clubs, the top players, or a lot of the players in the top teams haven't wanted to get vaccinated, but the media has not gone and interviewed them to say, well, why don't you want to get vaccinated? What are the reasons? I mean, they talk about, conspiracy theories involving Bill Gates, even though Bill Gates is on record talking about eugenics, talking about depopulation, and also talking about how vaccines are the best investment he ever made, a 20-to-1 return. Maybe some of these football players don't want to be putting more money into the pockets of Bill Gates. But, the media don't really go and question these players, ask them why specifically. Also, going back to Jurgen Klopp, I mean, if the unvaccinated are the killers now, why wasn't he one of the killers before he got his vaccination? I mean, how can he be a non-killer before he got his vaccination, but people who are delayed in getting theirs or choose not to get theirs, they're the killers now? It doesn't make any sense to me. I can't imagine it makes any sense to you either. Like I've also said before, the vaccinations were a bonus, or so they're presented to be, even though the vaccination was, preordained, ready to be rolled out following the phony coronavirus, the manufactured virus that came out of the lab. The virus and the vaccine, I believe, are strongly intertwined. If you're a vaccine company that wants to make a lot of money off a vaccine, you've got to have a virus beforehand to justify all these runaway profits the vaccine companies are making. But of course, I digress. So the point I want to make, per the way the media present this issue, is that the vaccine was a bonus. What if the vaccine had never come out? Would everyone just be a killer? What about all these people not taking the vaccine? Are they not standing up for individual rights? Are they not standing up for individual liberty? Should we not herald these people? Should we not claim these people? Thank these people. I mean, if they're giving up their lives, they're saying, we're not going to take the vaccine, we'd rather die anyway. They go and die. Are these people not heroes? Are these people not like the World War II soldiers who are fighting for freedom, giving up their lives for freedom, and don't need people like Jurgen Klopp or Gareth Southgate telling them what to do in their quasi-governmental roles? So I wanted to end on the point I've begun on, which is to do with the shortages and the deficits and the debt and the inflation. And this is all directly caused by the lockdown. And what the media and the political classes are all going to do is to try and distance themselves as much as possible from the costs of lockdown, which we're now seeing, because what they did at the beginning when they were calling for the lockdown, championing the lockdown, advocating for the lockdown, threatening people that they had to lock down, was to talk about the benefits of the lockdown. They said, this is a great thing, we stop the spread, we hover in our homes, we don't have to go to work, but now we're facing the costs of lockdown, which are higher prices, higher debt, higher unemployment and shortages. And of course, this is all caused because people sat at home, received cash from the government through furloughs, through handouts, and they're now using that cash to buy goods and services that not only did they not produce, but no one produced. So we have more cash chasing fewer goods. It can only lead to shortages. It can only lead to higher prices. And I want people listening to this to try to protect themselves as best they can and to realize this is just the beginning. This is going to be a tsunami through society of higher costs, runaway debt, more debt. I mean, if you think Britain's 4 trillion in debt is too high, wait till it gets to 6 trillion and 8 trillion, because that's where it's going. This was what came out of the quote unquote Conservative Party conference, which is that they have no intention of reducing the debt. They have no intention of getting debt down under control. They're going to expand it even more, and they're going to pat themselves on the back while they're doing it. So the country is in bad financial shape, which I have been forecasting since the lockdown began. It was one of the big, most obvious argument against it, really. But, beyond the lawlessness and the precedent that's set. But now we're starting to feel the consequences. The British people are starting to feel the consequences, notice the consequences. And, I think it's a good lesson for the future in that we need to avoid these kind of government lockdowns, government tyranny, government authoritarianism. We need to get back to the English Bill of Rights, and we need to fully and wholly respect British civil liberties. So I hope you like this video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll talk to you soon.